Hi, and welcome to The Shared Path. I'm Maggie Linton. Our next guest is an award winning author and one of the world's top nature, travel, and science writers. David Quammen's passion for the environment is highlighted in his new book, The Heartbeat of the Wild: Dispatches from Landscapes of Wonder, Peril, and Hope. It's a collection of essays written for National Geographic magazine over a 20-year period, and it's now revisited. Thanks for joining us, David. So
Maggie,
wonderful
thank
to
you for
have you.
having me. Nice to be with you.
Yeah. Okay. Before we get to your latest work, I want to begin with you. When and where did your curiosity for nature begin?
Oh, it began when I was a kid on the north edge of Cincinnati with a Midwestern hardwood forest out the back door. From the age of 6, I was interested in insects, snakes, turtles. Um, from the age of about 8 or 9, I was spending most of my time in that woods. And I was always interested in the natural world, but I was always interested in writing too. From the age of probably 11 or 12, I was writing little, stories and skits and songs and anything. And I ended up starting my writing career as a novelist because I had, well, for a lot of reasons, but I went toward the path of the writing and not toward the path of the studies of the natural world. I had some great teachers who helped me develop my um, understanding of literature and my skills as a writer, and began my career as a novelist, published 4 books of fiction, then turned back to the natural world and turned into a magazine writer specializing in ecology, evolutionary biology, conservation of wild places, eventually writing books about that as well as magazine articles, and then starting with National Geographic back in 1999. And I became the guy that they sent to remote places to write about wild creatures, always in partnership with a great National Geographic photographer. Did a lot of work in Africa, did some work in Asia, South America, and pulled those stories together into this book. But I hope this book is more than just a collection of stories. I've knit it together, and in a way, it's a manifesto from me on 40 years of work on the natural world, including the 20 years with National Geographic. What I see is the essence of wildness and the ways in which we can try and preserve some of it on this planet.
Beautifully written. You bring me there. And one of the things that you and I also have in common is I did a long interview with Jane Goodall, and
Uh,
you talk about her, and she's such a special woman with her little monkey that she always has with it. Or,
right, right.
but talk about her because one of the things you talk about in the book are the you talk about the people who are trying to make things work for the whole world, and in particular, taking care of nature and animals.
Right. And this is a book about people as well as a book about wild animals. I know that my audience is people, and people want to read about people. So this book is filled with human characters, some of whom are famous people like Jane, uh, some of whom are ordinary people trying to survive, trying to make a living on a landscape, maybe a landscape where they're raising goats or sheep, and there are also lions living on that landscape. Maybe they're trying to grow corn, and there are elephants living on that landscape, making it difficult. There are some heartbreaking stories about how hard it is to be a wild animal, to be a predator, to be a lion. Lions die early deaths, and how hard it is to be a person trying to raise a family, trying to raise a crop in the areas where humans and wildness overlap. And there are some heroes around the world, like Jane, like Greg Carr, the fellow who has funded and guided the restoration of Gorongosa National Park in Mozambique, um, uh, like a number of other people, like Chris Tompkins, who has, with her late husband, Doug Tompkins, they had made a lot of money in the clothing business with some brands with names like Patagonia and Esprit. And then they have devoted themselves to buying up wild land in Chile and Argentina and giving it to the peoples of those countries to be protected as national parks. I tell the story of Chris Tompkins and her work on that. So it's always about people. I mean, people are the problem for wildness on this planet because there are 8 billion of us and we're hungry and demanding, but people are the only solution as well. So we can't demonize people. We have to look for what's hopeful, look for what works, look for what's humane, takes care of people as well as taking care of wildlife. And that's part of the burden of this book, telling stories about that, about what really works for the conservation of biological diversity while taking care of people on this planet in the 21st century.
You talk about the biological diversity. I a couple of times I was going, weren't you afraid to go into some of these places? It's like, David, come on. Let's talk about your curiosity almost always overcame any fears that you had.
Um, I think that's true. I mean, I was in some situations with scientists, with conservationists that got a little bit dicey. I mean, when an elephant charges you, it's a serious thing. Elephants kill people, usually because they're scared and they're protecting their young, protecting their calves, or you've invaded their territory or something. Likewise with lions. I've been with scientists a couple of times when we got charged by elephants. In one case, we ran, and the elephant, it was a female who was protecting her calf, and the scientist, he was very nice. He gave me a head start. He tried to persuade her not to charge. He tried to stop her by going like that, and that allowed me to get about 20 steps in front of him. She caught him. She grabbed him with her trunk. She threw him through the air. Then she stepped forward and tried to impale him with her tusks. And I'm 50 feet away thinking, oh my God, here's one of the world's great elephant biologists, Ian Douglas Hamilton. And I was the one who caused him to be out there that particular day. And now I've gotten him killed. His guts are going to be all over the desert ground. And I go running up, and he's intact. And there are these two holes, these two tusk holes in the desert clay right where he was. But she missed him. She backed off. We got him on his feet. We got out of there. And he said, let's go back to camp and have a cup of tea and talk about this.
That's what
Okay. If it works for you, Ian, it works for me.
hey, I'm still alive. I'm above ground and breathing right now, so it's okay,
There
right?
you go. There you go.
Uh, the one thing you constantly bring up is the fragileness of nature, but yet its resilience and
Mhm.
the combination of the two working together
Yeah,
to survive the onslaught of humans.
that's right. That's right. Um, Nature, when it's intact, is very resilient. It can absorb insults, it can absorb injuries, but it has to be intact. And I talk about that. I talk about um, the four elements that are necessary for nature intact and with its heart beating. And those four elements are scale, connectivity, diversity, and process. And what I mean by that very briefly is scale. Has to be big enough, has to be a big enough area to support a population of lions, a population of tigers, wherever it is. And big predators like that need big areas. It has to have connectivity. It can't be cut apart into roads. It can't be fragments. It has to be a connected area. Has to have biological diversity. It has to have all the creatures that are related to one another. Has to have the herbivores and the carnivores, and has to have bacteria. Has to have amphibians. If it's a wetland, has to have scavengers. Has to have decomposers. All of those things. And the final thing I mentioned is processes, and that's what I'm talking about there: predation, herbivory, photosynthesis, decomposition, parasitism. Those are the processes that link an ecosystem together and keep it dynamic, keep its heart beating. So it needs all of those things. If it has those things, then it can absorb losses. You know, 10 lions might die, but if you've got a population of 200 lions living in a big area with lots of prey and lots of security for them, safety for them, then losing 10 lions is not a final disaster. those lions will repopulate. Those females will produce offspring. But if you've got a little area that's only got 15 lions in it, and it loses 10 lions, those last 5 lions are going to be in big trouble, and they may go extinct in that area because there might be too many males and not enough females. The females might be past reproductive age, might be some sort of a disease that comes or a fire, and they will be jeopardized if their area is too small and their population is too small. That's one of these elements. So yeah, nature is both highly resilient when we allow it to have that heartbeat, that scale, that connectivity, and it's fragile if we don't allow it that.
Too many people abuse the environment, but we're also met with, especially nowadays, and I'll start here in America, but you see it so much in Africa, is drought areas.
Mm-hmm.
And they continue to grow. And then the melting of snow caps in other areas. That's a threat to our environment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think of 3 big problems on this planet that are caused by humans. Climate change, which is what you're alluding to, loss of biological diversity, and the threat of emerging pandemics, diseases like COVID-19 coming out of a bat cave somewhere in China, diseases like Ebola coming out of a reservoir host somewhere in Central Africa. And sometimes those diseases cause millions of deaths around the world, as we've seen. Those 3 big problems are like, I think of them as 3 big, dark, churning rivers of trouble. They're flowing parallel. It's not that one contains the others. Climate change doesn't explain everything. Climate change doesn't explain all losses of biological diversity. Losses of biological diversity don't explain all problems of emerging viruses. They're parallel rivers. They're flowing because there's a big snowfield on a mountain, the Earth Mountain, and that snowfield is melting and feeding those rivers. What's causing that snowfield to melt? Human impact in all forms. Human population size multiplied by consumption. And you always have to say multiplied by consumption so you don't demonize the people who might have 6 kids in an African village, but they're consuming very little. They're living on the edge. They're living at survival level. They don't have resources, and they're not consuming as much as, a middle-class couple with 1 kid will be consuming in Orange County, California. So it's population size multiplied by consumption that's melting that snowfield and causing those 3 rivers of woe.
You just brought up viruses, and I'd ask you if we could talk about this because you had a very important book that came out last year that explained viruses, because people are there are still some people out there who are in denial. Yeah. And the fact that viruses change and it starts out one way and it goes to another, and a lot of that is the environmental impact.
Yeah. I started writing about viruses almost 20 years ago. I did an earlier book. The book you mentioned was Breathless, and it came out last October, and it's about this particular pandemic virus. Its evolution, its origin, its fierce journey through the human population, the scientists who study it. It's like the biography of the COVID virus. But I published an earlier book back in 2012 called Spillover, which was my first book-length treatment of emerging diseases, these pandemic diseases, all of which generally come out of wild animals. Whether the disease is caused by a virus, a new virus, or maybe a bacterium like bubonic plague, or Lyme disease, or some other kind of a microbe like the microbes that cause malaria. All of these things come originally from wild animals because we're a relatively young species. So viruses that infect us, they have to have a history. What's their history? Well, it's in wild animals. So when we interact with wild animals, we expose ourselves to those viruses and give something like the COVID virus an opportunity to jump from some poor, relatively obscure bat species living in caves in southern China to humans. And there's 8 billion of us, and it spreads around the world. And suddenly it's one of the world's most successful viruses by becoming a human virus. It's all about ecology and evolutionary biology, the study of viruses. The ecology is when we interact with the wildlife hosts that carry these viruses. And the evolutionary biology is when this virus mutates, adapts, and finds that it can make a living just fine in humans.
One of the other things that you say is that so many animals can carry up to 10 different forms of virus.
Yes, we don't really even know. Some scientists are working on that. They're arguing that we need an encyclopedic project to discover all the viruses in wild animals that we can. They call it the Global Virome Project. And other scientists say, no, and we need to target our resources. We got finite resources, so we need to just learn how to detect new viruses, dangerous new viruses, when they spill over into humans. Do that by a lot of what's called active surveillance, meaning taking blood samples from people who work around wildlife or at the interface between wildlife and maybe domestic animals, so that we can spot a new virus before it becomes an epidemic or a pandemic. For instance, you hear about avian flu, avian influenza. There's this H5N1 avian influenza in wild birds all over the planet. It's also in poultry. It's in domestic birds. A lot of losses to the poultry industry. Poultry workers are exposed to this virus when it gets into a flock of poultry and they start to cull it. Those poultry workers can become infected with that virus, and if it mutates in a certain way, it could become transmissible from human to human. And then avian influenza would become the next human pandemic. It could be worse than this one. How do we guard against that? Well, one of the ways is active surveillance. Those poultry workers, we need to be looking at their blood serum to see if they're being exposed to viruses before
Happens.
before 10 people suddenly call in sick at
Yeah.
that poultry
Yeah.
farm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. I want to go back to your book.
All right.
The Call of the Wild. No. The Heartbeat of the Wild. It is, you just take us into hidden locations, and they're not really hidden to the people who live there, but for people like us,
Mm-hmm.
it's such a wonder. And what has amazed you most about going to these locations? And do you have one or two in particular that just literally knocked your socks off?
Well, the Congo forest is high on the list for me. I mean, I've been to the Amazon, I've been to Borneo, I've been in a lot of rainforests on the island of New Guinea, but the Congo forest is big and it's really wild, a lot of it. Some of it has almost no human presence. Some of it has the presence of people who have lived in the forest sustainably a long time, like the Aka people, the Baka people, the Babinjeli, the Bangombi people. These are people's different ethnic subdivisions of the group that used to be known by the name Pygmy. Pygmy is not an acceptable name anymore for these people. But they are forest people with forest cultures that have lived in these places. And I've gotten to know some of them on some of the expeditions that I've been on. And I forget where I was going with that.
Well,
Oh, the Congo. The Congo.
yes, I was going to say
Yeah.
the Congo and its forest, which
Yes.
most of
Yes.
us have never even heard of. I mean, you mentioned places that it's like, where?
Yeah.
What? Like you
Well,
just reeled off a bunch of names, and I'm going, yeah, I'm glad you said those.
well, the very first assignment I did for National Geographic was, I can't remember if I've mentioned this already, but was to write a series of stories about a great expedition across the last remaining intact forests of Central Africa, the most pristine remaining forests. And those, in this case, were in the Republic of Congo and Gabon. And this fellow, an American explorer, conservationist, scientist named Mike Fay, with a lot of experience in Central Africa, organized this project to do a 2,000-mile survey trek on foot through these forests on a zigzag path that kept him away from people, away from roads, away from trails, away from villages, in the thickest part of the forest, in order to survey what was there. Where are the great abundances of forest elephants? Where are the places where the gorillas are still thriving? Where are the forest antelope? Where's the monkey diversity greatest? Where are the great big ancient trees? So that was his mission. And National Geographic asked me and a photographer to chase after him for long stretches of this trek and write 3 stories. So that's how I began with them, following this guy. I say long stretches, but not compared to what he did. He walked for 456 days from northeastern Congo to the Atlantic Ocean through the forest. 456 continuous days. I walked 4 stretches with him that amounted to about 53 days. So that's 53 days of walking in a pair of river sandals and shorts behind him with my little notebook and my binoculars, and walking during the day. And then we would wash in a stream to get the sweat off us so the sweat bees wouldn't cloud around us, and then dry off in front of the campfire and eat a simple dinner out of the pot, and then go to bed in our little tents, sleep on the ground, plastic tarp underneath so the termites didn't chew through the bottom of the tent in the middle of the night. And in the morning, I'd wake up clean and dry at about 4:30, 5 a.m. I'd write my journal notes from the day before. Then I would take duct tape over all the cuts and scratches on my feet, put my sandals back on and my shorts, and pop out of the tent, wait for it to get light, and we would start walking again. And that was difficult, but it was a great privilege. It was one of the great experiences in my life to see the Congo forest that way, and to know that you can do that. You got to be careful. You got to be careful you don't step on a Gaboon viper. You got to be careful that you don't get too close to a forest elephant. You got to be very careful that you don't step on a column of army ants in your sandals and your shorts. But the forest is beautiful. The forest is peaceful. The forest is teeming with life. And yeah, a lot of those kinds of life would like to eat you, would like your molecules. But if you're a little bit careful and
you
show
say, "Ooh,
respect,
you taste good."
yeah.
Yeah.
And that runs from little creatures to big creatures.
Yeah.
The forest is hungry and it wants your molecules. But if you keep moving and you stay alert, you can function just fine as just one more critter in that forest.
You know what? It's amazing when you think of one man going through, and then the two of you kind of joined in. But back and forth, he was really eating off of nature. It's not like he had 100 different cans of soups and things like that and
Well,
all
no,
around him.
no, he had 12 men who were carrying supplies, carrying computers, carrying tents, carrying bags of rice, carrying bags of manioc flour, carrying tins of sardines. I mean, the things that we would eat at night, we didn't eat much in the morning or for lunch, but what we would eat at night was, there would be a big pot for all of us, all 15 of us, a big pot on the campfire, and that would be filled with some kind of brown paste. And the paste was made up of maybe, powdered meat and tomato paste, and throw in some sardines if you got them, throw in some dried fish if you got them, throw in a whole lot of pepper, and stir it around, and then pour it over either rice or manioc flour, which you make into sort of a paste that is called fufu. And we were not eating wildlife. We were not living off the land, except occasionally he let his crew fish. If we passed a stream, they were allowed to catch fish, and we were allowed to eat fresh fish. But we walked for 10 days through Ebola country, and he was real clear to his cook: if you find a dead monkey on the ground, do not put that monkey in the stew pot while we're in Ebola territory.
Exactly. All right, listen, we're starting to run out of time. I want you to tell our listeners, or suggest to our listeners, what they can do to make our world a better place.
Wow, Maggie, that's a nice small question that's easy to answer. I think There are a lot of things that you cover on your show, I know. My little piece of that, in terms of an answer, is first of all, start by understanding, knowing a little bit, learning a little bit about what's out there around the world. Maybe you're not going to travel outside of America, but get your brain traveling outside of America. Get your brain going to some of these other places to think about the amazing wildlife and the amazing people that live in these different places. Some of them, they might be raising water buffalo in a forest that contains lions or tigers. That's not an easy life. Think about what their life is like. Think about what life is like for a lion that's trying to make a living in an area where the antelope have all disappeared and they've been replaced by cows. How does that lion stay out of trouble? Think about these things. Travel with me in this book, travel with anybody else in any other book, and learn about wildness around the world and the fact that wildness is a vanishing treasure on this planet. Gorillas, polar bears, lions and tigers and bears,
My.
crocodiles, huge,
Mm-hmm.
beautiful butterflies, all of it. It's a treasure. and
Please.
and bees, yes, yes, ma'am.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's a vanishing treasure, and everything that we humans do as consumers has some effect on that. So think about what you consume. Think about where it comes from. Think about what impact that might have. It's not just a matter of writing a check to the Jane Goodall Foundation. It's a matter of thinking about, how much meat do I eat in a given week? How many miles do I travel on airplanes? I don't have children. My wife and I don't have children. So when we die, that's it. That's the end of our impact. How many children you have is another factor. But, I fly around on airplanes too much. Don't tell Greta Thunberg how much I fly around on airplanes, please. She'll cut my throat. So I think about that. I look in the mirror and say, how much impact are you having? Everybody can look in the mirror and say, how much impact am I having? How much am I consuming that maybe I don't need to consume? That's making it harder for a lion to make a living in Tanzania, or for a person to make a living in Western India. It's all connected. We're all part of ecology and evolutionary biology.
All right. Well, many thanks to award-winning author David Quammen. His new book is The Heartbeat of the Wild: Dispatches from Landscape of Wonder, Peril, and Hope. It's available through National Geographic Books and other locations, including Target. Do your part to help keep our Earth safe and thriving. Until next time, seek peace and spread lots of love. I'm Maggie Linton.